Hidden deep within the rolling green hills of Sussex lies a sprawling estate where wildflowers bloom and silence holds the stories of a lifetime. There are no paparazzi at the gates, no gold plaques on the walls, only the quiet hum of nature and the faint echo of songs that once changed the world. This is where Sir Paul McCartney lives, and today we'll step beyond the fame, the fortune, and the fame to explore the homes, the legacy, and the timeless love behind the legend. What does it take to become a legend? Not just famous, not just successful, but truly legendary. For Paul McCartney, the journey began in a modest home in post-war Liverpool, a city battered by bombs, but still brimming with music. Born James Paul McCartney in 1942, he wasn't raised in wealth or privilege. His father, Jim, was a jazz musician turned cotton salesman, and his mother, Mary, a nurse whose gentle soul became Paul's moral compass. They didn't have much, but they had rhythm, and that rhythm shaped everything. Then at just 14, tragedy struck. Mary passed away suddenly, leaving a silence in Paul's world that could never be filled. But out of that grief came something unexpected: melody. He began to write, to sing, to play, not to escape pain, but to give it a voice. With a cheap guitar in hand, he started shaping a language that would one day speak to millions. But could anyone have imagined what came next? In 1957, fate played its hand. At a small church fair, Paul met a rebellious boy with a sharp tongue and a battered guitar, John Lennon. They were opposites in many ways, but music bridged the gap. Paul played Eddie Cochran's 20 Flight Rock with such precision that Lennon was stunned. That handshake sealed more than a friendship. It sparked a revolution. The Beatles were born not in studios or boardrooms, but in living rooms and smoky clubs, honing their craft through hours of relentless performance. By the early 1960s, Paul, John, George Harrison, and later Ringo Starr became something more than a band. They became the Beatles. And then came Love Me Do. Raw, youthful, irresistible. It was the beginning of Beatlemania. From Liverpool to Hamburg to the Ed Sullivan Show, their fame exploded like nothing the world had ever seen. 73 million Americans watched their US debut. Screaming fans, sold-out stadiums, cultural chaos. It wasn't just music, it was a movement. And at the heart of it all, Paul, the melodic genius, the charming face, the one who wrote Yesterday in a Dream, who captured sorrow in Eleanor Rigby, who screamed out raw joy in Can't Buy Me Love. But fame comes at a price. By the late 1960s, cracks began to show. Business disputes, creative tensions. The magic that once felt effortless now came with pressure, expectation, fatigue. And in April 1970, Paul did the unthinkable. He walked away. The Beatles were over. To millions, it felt like the end of the world. But to Paul, it was a personal collapse. The band had become his identity, his family. Without them, who was he? That answer wouldn't be found in London or Los Angeles. It would be found somewhere quieter, wilder, and deeply personal. A windswept farm on the Kintyre Peninsula of Scotland, far from the press, far from the spotlight, where Paul and his wife Linda lived in near isolation. No assistants, no entourages, just the sound of sheep, the smell of damp earth, and the healing silence of nature. There, he found something he hadn't known he'd lost. Peace. He chopped wood, he raised animals, he fixed fences, and most importantly, he wrote again. Music that wasn't for charts or critics, but for himself. His debut solo album, McCartney, was raw and unpolished, but it was his. It was proof that Paul McCartney could stand on his own. But he didn't stop there. With Linda and guitarist Denny Laine, he formed Wings. The critics rolled their eyes. The comparisons to the Beatles were inevitable. But then came Band on the Run. Then My Love. Then stadiums filled once again, this time with fans who weren't just clinging to the past, but celebrating Paul's new chapter. By the 1980s, Paul was collaborating with icons, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, and even experimenting with electronic and classical music. Always curious, always pushing forward. In 1997, Queen Elizabeth II knighted him, Sir Paul McCartney. But to fans, he was still the boy from Liverpool. the dreamer, the one whose songs captured both the ache of heartbreak and the bliss of young love. And through it all, he never lost that quiet center, the part of him that still needed refuge, that still needed the land, that still needed to belong to something older, simpler, and real. Which brings us, inevitably, to Sussex. Not just a place on the map, but a living, breathing extension of the man he became. A state in Sussex. What does peace look like when you've lived through Beatlemania? For Paul McCartney, it looks like 1,500 acres of rolling pastures in East Sussex, where the only crowds are flocks of sheep and the only stage is the morning sun spilling across the grass. This isn't some ultra-modern fortress or celebrity retreat with 10-foot marble gates. It's a working estate, a place with muddy boots by the door, hay in the air, and laughter echoing through old stone walls. At the heart of it all is the 19th century farmhouse, lovingly restored, expanded, and reimagined into something that feels less like luxury and more like home. Step through the front door, and time seems to slow. The scent of aged wood and fresh herbs greets you. Sunlight pours across wide plank floors, and every creak in the staircase tells a story. In the kitchen, an oversized island anchors the space. It's not just a place for chopping vegetables. It's where conversations unfold over tea, where grandchildren perch on stools, and where memories simmer alongside Sunday stews. A hearth glows warmly beside a casual dining nook, making it the kind of kitchen where hours disappear without you noticing. Move into the great room, and it's a study in contradiction. Cathedral-like ceilings soar overhead, yet the space wraps around you like a soft blanket. Shuttered interior windows add Old English charm, while the quiet hum of a distant guitar lingers in the background, like a house that remembers every note ever played within its walls. And then there's the living room, which spills out onto a bluestone patio, a peaceful outdoor expanse where Paul can sit with Nancy and watch the changing colors of the countryside. You can almost hear the breeze playing through the trees, or imagine Paul sipping mint tea, scribbling lyrics, or simply closing his eyes to the rhythm of the wind. The dining room still knows how to host a holiday. Long wooden tables, flickering candlelight, soft laughter. It's a room that glows during Christmas, Easter, or any ordinary evening that deserves to feel extraordinary. Upstairs, the main bedroom is tucked away in a corner for privacy, reflecting Paul's lifelong craving for simplicity over spectacle. One guest bedroom hides a cedar closet, a quiet nod to thoughtful craftsmanship. There's even laundry upstairs, which may not sound glamorous, until you realize that even the most legendary rock stars still need socks folded and sheets changed. Down below, a stone-walled nook is just waiting to become a wine cellar, its cool embrace practically begging to store vintages aged like the melodies that echo through the estate. There's a sauna too, tucked discreetly away like a secret luxury earned over a lifetime of tireless creation. But the magic of this estate isn't just inside, it's in the land itself. Beyond the home stretch fenced paddocks, dry lots, and barns, each with a history, each still very much alive. One barn, built for horses, includes 4 stalls, a heated tack room, and a hayloft capable of swallowing 1,200 bales. Another used to be a dairy barn, and though it no longer houses cows, it still stands with purpose and potential. The chicken coop isn't ornamental. It's functional, clean, cared for. Like every living thing on this land, it's part of a rhythm older than fame. And then there's the party barn. Yes, a barn built for celebrating. It features a barrel vaulted ceiling, a full bar, and a rustic elegance that transforms ordinary nights into unforgettable memories. It's not hard to imagine Paul playing a few acoustic tunes here, surrounded by friends, far away from the eyes of the world. But the estate holds more surprises. There's a garage with a finished game room above it, a place for pool tables, guitars, or quiet retreat. A storybook cottage-style apartment provides cozy charm for guests. Nearby, a 2-bedroom apartment with a loft ensures that everyone, family, friends, musicians, caretakers, has space to breathe. And tucked away, there's a studio with its own bathroom, a potential creative sanctuary where inspiration flows as naturally as the breeze through the grass. This estate isn't about showing off. It's about slowing down. It's about letting nature do the talking. Where other celebrities build kingdoms of concrete and cameras, Paul McCartney has built a sanctuary of soul and soil. Here, there's time to plant trees, to walk with your thoughts, to create without pressure. Here, he is not Sir Paul, not the Beatle, not the billionaire, just Paul, the man who loves music, who loves family, who loves the earth. In a world that runs too fast, this is where he found stillness. And while the Sussex estate is one of his most treasured homes, it's not the only one that holds the echoes of history. Because nestled behind modest trees on a quiet London street lies the mansion where Beatlemania once lived and breathed. Mansion in Cavendish. You wouldn't notice it if you walked by. There are no golden gates, no paparazzi luring facades, no flashy statements of wealth. Just a quiet brick house on Cavendish Avenue, nestled behind a row of trees in London's elegant St. John's Wood. But for those who know, this is no ordinary home. This is the house where Beatlemania once lived, and breathed, and wept, and whispered its final songs. Paul McCartney bought the Cavendish Mansion in 1965, at the height of the Beatles' fame. While others splurged on limos and lavish estates, Paul chose modest elegance, an old 3-story residence just a few blocks from Abbey Road Studios. A home, not a trophy. Step inside, and you are greeted not by extravagance, but intentionality. The walls are deep midnight blue, splashed with warm golden accents, a color palette that feels familiar, because it mirrors the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, one of the greatest albums ever made. Here, the very colors seem to hum with melody. In the living room, the decor is timeless. Victorian armchairs meet mid-century sofas. Persian rugs soften hardwood floors. Dim lamps cast a warm, cinematic glow. It's a place made for conversations, or quiet solitude, or, if you listen closely, songwriting sessions that shook the world. On one mantelpiece, a lyric, handwritten by Paul, is framed in simple glass. A moment frozen in ink, a reminder of genius, captured on a whim. Near a bookshelf, his old Hofner bass leans against the wall, its wood faded from countless rehearsals, its strings holding the residue of musical history. And in the corner, a dusty harmonium, the same one Paul and John once used during Beatles rehearsals. Its keys still echo if pressed gently enough, as if the house remembers the chords. Photographs line the shelves, Paul grinning beside John Lennon, caught mid-laugh, candid shots of George Harrison sipping tea, candid Polaroids of Linda, barefoot in the garden. But the centerpiece of the house? The upright piano near the window. It's seen more history than most recording studios. There, in the hush of early mornings or the stillness of London evenings, Paul composed, sometimes sketching melodies, other times pouring his soul into chords that would later fill arenas. Picture this. Afternoon light spills through lace curtains. Paul sits, one hand on the keys, the other holding a teacup. Outside, the city moves fast. Inside, time pauses, just long enough for another song to be born. The garden, though small, is personal. Trimmed hedges, flower beds, and a bench beneath a birch tree. Not for show, but for being. It's where Paul would sip tea with Linda, or read quietly with Nancy, or simply listen to the birds. This wasn't the place to escape fame, it was the place to survive it. A fortress of calm, just minutes from the chaos of Abbey Road. In fact, Paul often walked there. No chauffeur, no entourage, just a stroll through the neighborhood, carrying a melody in his mind. Over the decades, Cavendish Mansion has absorbed every stage of his life. The dizzying heights of Beatlemania, the crushing silence after the breakup, the love stories, the heartbreaks, the reinventions. It's seen joy, mourning, rebirth. It held Linda's laughter, the soft patter of his children's footsteps, and the solitude that comes after losing people you love. And yet, it's never stopped being home. Today, the house is estimated to be worth nearly $18 million. But let's be honest, how do you price history? How do you value the walls that heard Let It Be before the world did? That sheltered a man remaking himself after losing everything he'd built? For fans, Cavendish Avenue is sacred ground. But for Paul, it has always been something far simpler, far more important. A space to breathe, a place to be human. A quiet room where songs begin as whispers, and where a life of chaos found its calm. What kind of cars does a Beatle drive? Do you picture Lamborghinis and Bugattis? Not Paul McCartney. Because for him, cars aren't just status symbols, they're stories on wheels. And in his garage, every engine hums with memory. Cars. The Corvette C5 convertible. The Rebel's Ride. Built in the late 1990s, the Chevrolet Corvette C5 convertible is raw power in American form. It houses a 5.7-liter V8 engine, pushing out 345 horsepower with a roar that reminds you why muscle cars matter. But why would Paul, a knighted British icon, fall for an American classic? Because this car represents freedom. Imagine him, roof down, hair tousled by the wind, driving along coastal roads with Linda beside him and the Beatles softly playing from the stereo. It wasn't about flash. It was about remembering who he was before the noise. The Lexus LS 600 HL, the philosopher's choice. Then comes the Lexus LS 600 HL, a hybrid luxury sedan that reflects Paul's evolution. It's not built to impress with speed, it impresses in intention. With a V8 hybrid engine offering a smooth, near-silent ride, it represents balance between luxury and sustainability, between progress and responsibility. As a lifelong vegetarian and environmental activist, Paul chose this car not just for comfort, but for conscience. He once said, "We can live well without causing harm." This Lexus, that philosophy in motion. The Range Rover Autobiography. The Quiet King. If cars had titles, the Range Rover Autobiography would be royalty. Equipped with massaging leather seats, panoramic views, and a whisper-quiet cabin, this SUV is built for those who move through the world with quiet confidence. It's the vehicle of a man who doesn't need to be seen, but when he is, he's unforgettable. Perfect for arriving at Abbey Road or slipping away into the countryside. Because sometimes, dignity drives on four wheels. The Range Rover Vogue, the humble companion. Not every drive needs to make a statement. That's why Paul also chooses the Range Rover Vogue. Understated, elegant, functional. The Vogue is for everyday life, the quick trip to town, a visit to his grandchildren, or a simple drive through English lanes with Nancy by his side. It's not about horsepower. It's about harmony. Paul's garage isn't massive. He doesn't chase trends or collect supercars just to flex wealth. He chooses cars like he writes songs, with meaning, memory, and heart. Each one tells a different story, of rebellion, of wisdom, of presence, and of peace. And together, they tell us more about who he is than any gold record ever could. How do you measure the worth of a melody? For Paul McCartney, each lyric, each chord, each silence between the notes became more than just art. It became an empire. As of 2025, Paul McCartney's estimated net worth stands at $1.2 billion. But don't let the number fool you. This isn't sudden wealth. It's the quiet result of 7 decades of vision, work, and one relentless belief that music should belong to its maker. The story begins in the ashes of the Beatles' breakup. Paul could have lived comfortably off his Beatles royalties forever, but he didn't settle. Instead, he created Wings, launched a successful solo career, and reinvented himself time and time again, with hits like Band on the Run, Live and Let Die, and Maybe I'm Amazed keeping him at the top of charts and stadium tours through the 70s and 80s. And then came the collaborations, Ebony and Ivory with Stevie Wonder, Number, one in the US, Say, Say, Say with Michael Jackson, another chart topper soundtrack songs, orchestral albums, and electronic side projects, all under his name, all monetized with care. But Paul's fortune didn't just come from performance, it came from ownership. Unlike many artists of his era, Paul understood early on that publishing rights were the real goldmine. Though the Beatles' original catalog was lost to a web of legal knots, Paul eventually began reacquiring publishing rights, starting with other artists' songs and gradually building a vast portfolio. Every time a song under his umbrella plays on radio, shows up in a commercial, or is covered by a modern artist, it generates income. Quietly, consistently, indefinitely. He also took advantage of touring. His 2010s and early 2020s world tours grossed hundreds of millions of dollars. And while many artists saw streaming as a threat, Paul embraced it. He brokered smart deals with Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube, making sure his music reached new generations and kept the royalties flowing. His real estate holdings added to the equation. The Cavendish Mansion in London, now worth approximately $18 million. The Sussex estate, with its farmland and storybook charm, plus properties in the US, including rumored holdings in Manhattan and Arizona. What's perhaps most remarkable isn't just how he earned his fortune, but how he spends it. You won't find Paul on luxury yachts or dripping in designer labels. You'll find him funding music education, supporting animal rights, and maintaining homes that carry history more than hype. His money lives in guitars, in scholarships, in organic vegetables grown on his own soil. In a world of excess, Paul McCartney's fortune is different. It's grounded, thoughtful, quiet. Because the man who helped write Let It Be never needed to scream his success. He just let it sing. Behind every great song is a feeling. Behind every great man is a purpose. For Paul McCartney, the music has always moved hearts. But the actions, they've changed lives. His journey into philanthropy didn't begin with a press release or a multi-million-dollar pledge. Philanthropy. It began with a single, radical decision to stop eating meat. In the 1970s, when vegetarianism was still a fringe idea, Paul and his late wife, Linda McCartney, made a quiet but powerful shift. It wasn't for fashion. It wasn't for trend. It was for compassion. One day, over lunch on their farm in Scotland, they realized that the animals they were raising with love were no different from the ones being slaughtered for food. That moment, simple, personal, deeply human, sparked a lifelong mission, and it didn't end in their kitchen. Paul became one of the loudest voices for animal rights in the world. He joined forces with PETA, lent his name to global campaigns, and never hesitated to speak truth, even when it made people uncomfortable. He famously said, "If slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be vegetarian." That one quote, it's now etched into the global conversation on animal welfare. But his giving didn't stop at animals. Paul is also a fierce advocate for the environment. His concerts don't just entertain, they educate. On-screen visuals warn about climate change. Green messages play between songs. His backstage catering? Always plant-based. Even his travel footprint is measured, reduced, considered. He supports groups that plant trees, protect oceans, research sustainable farming, and push governments toward eco-reform. Because to Paul, saving the planet is not a slogan, it's a responsibility. Then there's music education, the very thing that saved him. Paul never forgot what it felt like to be a boy with a secondhand guitar and no formal training. That's why he's donated millions to programs that give instruments, training, and opportunities to underprivileged children across the UK, the US, and beyond. He's funded scholarships at Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, supported Youth Music UK, and backed projects that keep music alive in schools threatened by budget cuts. Because he knows music isn't just art, it's a lifeline, a language for the voiceless. And then quietly, without cameras, Paul has supported numerous humanitarian efforts. He's raised funds for victims of war and natural disasters. He's appeared in anti-landmine campaigns. He's written and performed in benefit concerts, from Live Aid to Concert for New York after 9/11. Even when headlines focus on the glamour, Paul's compass remains steady. He gives not for praise, but because it's right. Paul McCartney's philanthropy isn't loud. It's not performative. It's lived. It's in every plant-based meal he eats, in every child holding a donated violin, in every lyric that calls for peace, not power. Because for Paul, the music never ends at the stage. It flows outward, into action, into change, into the belief that the world, like a great song, can always find harmony if someone dares to rewrite the course. But what does a living legend do when no one is watching? When the stages are empty? When the lights go down? When it's just him and the sound of the wind through the trees? For Paul McCartney, those are the moments that matter most, because behind the fame, the fortune, and the songs that shape generations lives a man who still treasures the ordinary. Personal life, a man who rises with the sun, not for rehearsal, but for stillness. A man whose greatest joy isn't applause, but family. Paul is the father of 5 children. Mary, his eldest, found her voice behind the lens, a gifted photographer with her own legacy. Stella, the visionary designer, has changed how the world sees fashion, sustainable, bold, and unapologetically modern. James followed his father's footsteps into music, quietly carving his own sound. Heather, Linda's daughter from a previous marriage, was raised as Paul's own. And Beatrice, the youngest, born in 2003, brings light and laughter to his later chapters. Through them, Paul's legacy breathes beyond the charts. It lives in conversations at the dinner table, in advice whispered over tea, in the soft echo of laughter in a garden in Sussex. Now, as a grandfather, he's found a new kind of joy. He reads stories on the floor. He lets the grandchildren tap the keys of his upright piano. He tells them tales, not about stadiums or knighthoods, but about sheep on the farm, songs written under trees, and love that never fades. Even in his 80s, Paul keeps moving. His mornings often begin with yoga or a light stretch, sometimes in silence, sometimes with gentle music playing in the background. Breakfast is simple: fruit, grains, tea, no fanfare, no entourage. Afternoons are for music, not for a deadline, not for a label, just for him. He'll sit at the piano, notebook in hand, searching, not for hits, but for truth. A melody, a phrase, a memory wrapped in chords. His wife, Nancy Shevell, often joins him. Their love is quiet, grounded, and refreshingly real. They've been together since 2007, married since 2011. She is not part of the spectacle. She is part of the stillness. They garden together. They walk their land. They shop for groceries without security detail. They are 2 souls who have found something rare in this world: peace. When the world sees Paul, it still sees the Beatle. But Nancy sees the man who still hums to himself while making toast. The man who still smiles when birds land near the window. The man who still believes in ordinary magic. Paul still tours, still writes, still speaks to the world through song. But between those moments, he returns to the rhythm that matters most, the rhythm of real life. It's in the rustle of the trees at his Sussex estate, in the sound of grandchildren's feet on hardwood floors, in the silence between notes that says more than any lyric ever could. He's not chasing legacy, he's living it, one quiet morning at a time. And so, as we return one last time to that farmhouse in Scotland, as we imagine the wind lifting the curtains and the notes of blackbird floating through the evening air, we realize something. This was never just a story about a Beatle. This was a story about a man who lost his mother at 14 and still learned to love. A man who lost his band but never lost his song. A man who never stopped believing that music could make the world better, even if just by one note, one voice, one heart at a time. Sir Paul McCartney doesn't need statues. He doesn't need skyscrapers or headlines. He has already etched himself into the soundtrack of humanity. And perhaps that's the most powerful legacy of all. If this journey through Paul McCartney's world has touched something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments. What moved you the most? Was it the farm that healed him, the mansion that remembered him, or the music that never let you go? Because in the end, maybe we're all just looking for the same things Paul found: a home, a melody, and a little bit of peace.